people over 55 who remember the Cold War, Watergate, and the 2008 financial crisis. This confrontation promised to be more than just a television show. It was a moment when two completely different Americas, one that believed in progress through justice and dialogue, and the other that relied on strength and economic nationalism, collided live on air. Across the country, televisions turned on and older Americans, used to political dramas but tired of empty promises, braced themselves for the storm. The studio was filled with tense silence. The lighting was harsh, the spotlights hummed quietly but palpably, and the smell of coffee from cheap plastic cups mixed with the faint scent of hairspray used by stylists before the broadcast. Jasmine Crockett sat to the left, her dark blue suit contrasting with the fiery gleam in her eyes. She held a stack of notes, but her posture, straight back, hands calmly placed on the table, betrayed the confidence of someone unafraid to speak the truth, even if it hurt. Across from her sat Caroline Levitt, in a sharp white suit, with perfectly styled light hair. Her youth, she was only 27, might have deceived some, but her cold, piercing gaze and the slight smile on her thin lips suggested she was ready for a fight. The host, veteran journalist Tom Brokaw, over 80, but whose voice still carried authority, began the broadcast. His graying hair shone under the lights, and the wrinkles on his face seemed like a map of a life well lived. Good evening, America. Tonight, we stand at a crossroads. The economy is cracking at the seams, inflation is rising, and the Doge project raises more questions than answers. Before us are two women representing different visions for our future. Jasmine Crockett, Congresswoman from Texas' 30th District, and Caroline Levitt, Press Secretary to President Trump. Ms. Levitt, let's start with you. Why should Americans trust Doge when critics call it a tool to dismantle social programs? Caroline leaned back in her chair, her voice sharp as the sound of metal. Tom, Doge isn't about dismantling, it's about efficiency. Over the past 50 years, the government has ballooned to unsustainable sizes, spending trillions on ineffective programs. We're cutting bureaucracy, returning money to taxpayers, and putting America first. Elon Musk and President Trump know how to make the system work. Critics are just afraid of change. Jasmine raised an eyebrow, her fingers lightly tapping the table, the only hint of a storm inside her. She waited for her turn, then spoke in a low, yet piercing voice, like the southern wind before a storm. Caroline, I understand you're young and ambitious, but let's not sugarcoat reality. Doge isn't about efficiency, it's about control. You want to freeze federal grants, leave people without housing and food stamps, all so a few billionaires can get even richer. My constituents in Dallas are already feeling this. Schools are underfunded, clinics are closing. You say America first, but who's America? Not the one where ordinary people live. The studio tensed. The cameras zoomed in on both women's faces. Caroline bit her lip, her fingers lightly gripping the pen she held. Jasmine, I respect your passion, but the facts speak for themselves. We've cut the deficit by $200 billion in 3 months. People want jobs, not handouts. Your approach is outdated dependency politics that have kept people in poverty for decades. Jasmine smiled, not warmly, but with a touch of irony. Facts? Let's talk facts. In your February report, you said you stopped waste, but somehow Tesla got a $1.2 billion contract without competition. That's not efficiency, that's cronyism. And when I see my people suffering, I don't stay silent, Caroline. I fight. Tom Brokaw tried to intervene, but the tension had already spiraled out of control. Caroline suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly across the floor. You accuse us of corruption, but where's your proof? You're just playing on emotions, because you don't have a plan. Her voice cracked on the high notes, betraying her first emotions. Jasmine remained seated, her gaze calm but firm as granite. I don't need to yell to prove I'm right. Proof? Look at the closed daycare centers in my district. Look at the veterans who can't get their medicine. I'm not playing, Caroline. I live this reality every day. Suddenly, A loud crash shattered the silence. A technician had accidentally dropped a microphone, and the sound of the impact broke the tension. Everyone froze. Tom Brokaw, surprised but experienced, tried to regain control of the situation. "All right, let's take a short break," he said, his voice trembling with unexpectedness. But what happened backstage a few minutes later shocked everyone. The cameras turned off, but in the dressing room, Jasmine and Caroline found themselves face to face, alone, with only a few startled assistants as witnesses. The tension that had built up on air exploded. "You think you can just throw accusations and walk away?" Caroline snapped, her face flushed with anger. "You have no idea who you're messing with." Jasmine stepped closer, her voice quiet but sharp. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. Someone who thinks they can scare people into silence. But I'm not one of those you can shut up, Caroline. And America will see that." Caroline recoiled, her eyes flashing with fury and perhaps fear. She turned and rushed out of the room, throwing over her shoulder, "You'll regret this, Jasmine." The door slammed, leaving Jasmine alone in the dressing room. She exhaled, her hands trembling, but a faint smile appeared on her face. She knew this was just the beginning. In a few minutes, the broadcast was set to resume, and the whole country was waiting to see what would happen next. When the dressing room door slammed shut behind Caroline Levitt, Jasmine Crockett remained standing in the middle of the cramped room. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself to breathe slower, inhaling the stale air, soaked in the scent of old carpets and spilled coffee. On the table in front of the mirror, scattered makeup brushes and note sheets lay untouched, the ones she never had the chance to use on air. Through the wall, she could hear the muffled voices of assistants hustling around, preparing to resume the broadcast. Jasmine approached the mirror, looked at her reflection, dark eyes, pressed lips, a wrinkle between her brows. "You knew this wouldn't be easy," she whispered to herself, adjusting the collar of her jacket. Meanwhile, in the hallway, Caroline, still seething with rage, pulled out her phone and dialed number. Her fingers trembled as she pressed the device to her ear. A low, calm voice answered on the other end. "Caroline, what happened? You sound like you're ready to kill someone," the man said with a light laugh. "She set me up, Josh. Jasmine Crockett accused us of nepotism with Tesla Live on air. This could ruin everything." Her voice shook with fury. "We can't let her get away with this." Joshua Kane, senior advisor for the Doge Project and right-hand man to Elon Musk, fell silent. Caroline heard him tapping his pen on the desk, a habit that annoyed her, but one she tolerated because of his influence. "Calm down, Caroline. We'll handle this. But you need to get back on air and keep your composure. If you show weakness, you'll just give her points," he finally said. "And if she keeps going, she has the numbers, Josh. She knows about the contract." Caroline gripped the phone so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "Then we'll give her something else to distract her." "Trust me," Joshua replied, and the connection was cut. Caroline exhaled, leaning against the cold wall of the hallway. Her white suit was slightly wrinkled, and her perfect hairstyle was beginning to fall apart. She knew Joshua had something planned, but his words did little to calm her. Something in Jasmine's tone, not shouting, not aggression, but calm confidence, had thrown her off. She was used to opponents who either conceded or exploded in anger. But Jasmine was different. In the studio, Tom Brokaw was already seated, reviewing his notes. His hands trembled from age, but his eyes remained sharp. He had witnessed many political battles in his career, but tonight's broadcast felt different, like there was something more than just words in the air. Technicians buzzed around in headphones, checking cameras, and the hum of the air conditioner blended with the quiet whispers of producers behind glass. Jasmine was the first to return to the studio, her steps measured but confident. She sat, straightening her shoulders, and looked at Caroline's empty seat. Tom raised an eyebrow. "I hope we're all ready to continue," he asked with a touch of sarcasm. "I'm ready, Tom," Jasmine replied, her voice calm but full of strength. "America deserves to know the truth, even if some don't like it." Caroline entered just a minute before the broadcast resumed, her face once again a mask of cold confidence. She sat down without looking at Jasmine and adjusted her microphone. The cameras turned on, the red light flashed, and Tom spoke again. "We're back on air." Before the break, we heard sharp accusations from both sides. "Ms. Crockett, you mentioned a contract with Tesla. Can you provide more details?" Jasmine nodded, her fingers lightly touching the notes, but she didn't take her eyes off the camera. In February of this year, Doge announced cutting waste, but 2 weeks later, Tesla received a $1.2 billion contract to develop a logistics system without a tender. This isn't a coincidence, Tom. It's a scheme where taxpayers fund private interests, and people who rely on government programs are left with nothing. Caroline pressed her lips together but quickly responded. "This is absurd. The Tesla contract was necessary to modernize the infrastructure. We chose the best company for the job, and it delivered, saving $50 million in the first month alone." Jasmine just wants to distract from the fact that her party has no real plan. The atmosphere in the studio grew tense. Viewers at home, especially older Americans used to deciphering political intrigue, could feel that something was brewing. But no one was prepared for what happened next. Suddenly, the studio door creaked open. Everyone turned. A man of average height in a dark suit, with graying hair and a piercing gaze, stood in the doorway. He held a folder of documents. The technicians froze, Tom Brokaw scowled, and Jasmine and Caroline exchanged surprised glances. The man walked up to the table and dropped the folder in front of Caroline. "Ms. Levitt, you should see this before you continue," he said in a low voice, cold determination in his tone. Caroline opened the folder, and her face drained of color. She skimmed the first page, then the second, and her hands began to tremble. Jasmine leaned forward, trying to make sense of what was happening. "Who are you? And what is this?" Caroline demanded sharply, her voice cracking. "My name is Edward Green. I'm a former auditor of Doge. And these are the documents proving that your project isn't just inefficient, it's illegal. Falsified reports, inflated contracts, money laundering. It's all here," the man replied, his tone calm, but the words fell like stones. The studio erupted into chaos. Producers screamed into their headsets, technicians scrambled, and Tom Brokaw tried to regain control of the situation. "Wait, Mr. Green, you're saying you have evidence against Doge?" he asked, his voice trembling with shock. "Yes, and I'm ready to testify before Congress," Edward replied, looking at Jasmine. "I heard what you said, Congresswoman. You're right. People are suffering, and I can't stay silent any longer." Caroline sprang to her feet, her chair crashing to the floor. "This is absurd. This is a forgery. You can't just barge in here and—" She stopped, her eyes darting between Edward and Jasmine. Jasmine slowly stood up, her gaze calm but fiery. "If this is true, Caroline, we all need to talk. Not shout, not accuse, but figure this out. Because if these documents are real, America deserves to know what's going on." The broadcast cut off. The screen in millions of homes across the country went black, leaving viewers in shock and anticipation. What did these documents mean? Could Jasmine use this moment to change the course of events? And what would Caroline do now that she was cornered? The air was thick with tension as the broadcast abruptly cut off. Across the country, viewers sat in stunned silence, their eyes glued to the blank screen. What had just happened? What did these documents mean for the future? In the studio, the silence was palpable. Tom Brokaw, still in shock, struggled to regain control. He stared at the now empty chair where Caroline had sat, and then at Jasmine, who stood with a quiet, determined look on her face. Her voice was calm but unwavering. "America deserves to know the truth," Jasmine said, her eyes fixed on the camera. "And if we have to fight for it, then we will." A few seconds passed, and then the door to the studio creaked open. A group of security guards stepped inside, their eyes scanning the room. Caroline had fled, her earlier cold confidence replaced with with a frantic need to disappear. The documents had shaken her to her core, and she knew that her time in the spotlight was over. Edward Green, the former auditor who had turned the tables, remained behind. He stood by the table, arms crossed, waiting for the inevitable storm to pass. His gaze shifted from Jasmine to Tom. "I don't expect this to be easy," Edward said quietly. "But we all have a part to play now." Tom swallowed hard. "What happens next?" "Now," Edward began, his voice steady, "we make sure that the truth comes out. No more cover-ups, no more lies. This is bigger than any of us." As the security guards moved to secure the area, Jasmine turned to face the camera one last time. The stage was set, and she knew this was just the beginning of a much larger battle. "Thank you for watching," she said, her voice strong. "The truth will always find a way to the light, no matter how much they try to keep it in the dark." The screen cut to black, leaving millions of viewers hanging on the edge of their seats. What would come next? Would Jasmine be able to expose the corruption that had taken root in the heart of power? And would Caroline ever face the consequences of her actions? For now, no one knew. But one thing was certain: the game had changed forever. And nothing would ever be the same again.